Stefka, you are still muted.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. Good morning. For the third time, the first time when I'm not on mute. Thank you everyone for joining. Without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome you this morning on behalf of the Protect Consortium. My name is Stefka Domuzova. I'm a Space Earth Observation Orchestrator at EIT Climate Kick, and today I would mostly entertain you together with my colleagues from the consortium, Ioana Roska from Aerospace Valley and Tantam Le from Climate Kick as well. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Probably not in a presenter mode yet.
No.
So before we get into the car, a couple of housekeeping rules. Please try to keep your mics off and probably ideally your cameras off, especially if you're not a speaker. Don't hesitate to ask us any questions on the chat, and we will see if we can address them after each intervention, or if they're more general, maybe at the end of the presentation. And the recording of today's event, as well as the slides, will be available on the Protect website in the coming weeks, all together with the recordings and the slides from the other webinars. So what we are here for today is to this is a Protect event. We are not here to talk about Protect, but just a little bit of context. Protect is the Horizon Europe project that is aiming at creating capacity and raising awareness for pre-commercial procurement in the field of climate services. We are working specifically in 5 domains. It's the domains that you see here. It's agriculture, forestry and land use, civil security and protection, energy and utilities, marine and coastal, and urban. What we are doing in the realm of capacity building and awareness, one of the things we do is this series of curriculum webinars. It would be composed of 10 webinars altogether, 4 of which are taking place in spring. Today we are having the second webinar. Yesterday we had a very interesting webinar provided by our colleagues from Carver's Procurement that helped us to dive into the realm of pre-commercial procurement. Today we will focus a little bit more on climate services. So the 4 sessions that are happening between this week and 2 weeks from now, as you see, are focused on innovation procurement, climate services, and Earth observation in a little bit of an agnostic way. And those that we would have in the autumn would be dedicated to each of the 5 applications domains that I showed you earlier, and of which you would hear a little bit more later by my colleague Ioana. So this is the curriculum. This is where we are today. We invite you to register also for the other webinars happening respectively both in 2 weeks, the 4th and the 5th of April. The webinars are connected to each other by content. This being said, it is not necessary that you attend one so that you can attend the next one, but it may help you to contextualize things. And when it doesn't, well, let us know if you have any questions where we can understand your comprehension. So what we will start exploring today in our second webinar, but our first webinar of our climate series, would be why should we care about climate services? What do we mean by climate services, and what do we measure with them? We would have Tantam Le talking about this. Then you would hear me again about the types of climate services that we are looking at and that in general are considered to exist. And you would probably understand the conditionality of my phrasing a bit a couple of slides later. And then Joanna from Aerospace Valley will tell us what is the role of Earth observation in climate services. And then we would all have questions and answers. And don't worry, if you don't have questions for us, we would have questions for you. So starting from the, I would pass the floor to Tantam. That would tell you why should you care about climate services and how to care about your climate services. Tantam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefka, and I hope you can hear me well. Okay, yes. So good morning to all participants, whether you're joining us live now or you will be watching this session in replay. We expect that most of you will have worked probably with climate services one way or another. However, many may not see the full scope and the growing variety of the climate services market. And some elements we will share are already familiar to some of you. So sorry about that, but hopefully you shall still find some food for thought in today's and upcoming sessions. Conversely, though, if, as Stefka just said, if any notion we use is not well known to you, so please do post your question in the chat and we will do our best to clarify. So actually, one reason why people are not so clear about what climate services cover is that the notion is at once intuitive and yet not defined in universally accepted terms. So here is what the European Roadmap for Climate Services said in 2015. The transformation of climate-related data and other relevant information into
You're muted, Tantam.
We cannot hear you now.
When did you lose me? When did you lose me?
Almost from the beginning.
We lost you just after you started talking about the European Roadmap for Climate Services. So maybe if you want to go back to the definition of climate service, that would be appropriate.
Okay, so that's fine. Sorry about that. So the European Roadmap for Climate Services said in 2015 what they meant by climate services. So you can see the definition here on the left-hand side. So transformation of climate-related data with other relevant information into customized products. So different types of products. But any service that is in relation to climate and that may be of use for the society at large. So of course, this includes data, information, and knowledge that supports adaptation, mitigation, disaster, risk management. So it's a valid definition, but it's somewhat abstract. So what I was saying to myself is that it may be more practical to browse through a taxonomy of climate services and to hear about some examples of what we might not have thought of as being climate services. And we shall start to share some first insights in this webinar. But in short, the range of climate services may be broader than what you think. But why should we care about climate services in the first place? Well, we are probably all aware of the urgency of acting on climate change. Many of you know, especially if you work in cities or regions, what are the most pressing climate-related challenges that your communities are facing on the ground. And not every climate issue shall be resolved top-down with a magic wand. So more and more actors on the ground will need to take action. And for this, we will need to access products and services that make climate-relevant information and data actionable and actionable by non-specialists. As a quick reminder, because it might not be obvious to everybody, mitigation services help organizations mitigate their contributions to the anthropogenic negative impact of climate change, whereas adaptation services focus on adjusting the behavior of communities and individuals and on adapting infrastructures to deal with the effects of climate change. However, climate mitigation and adaptation can be interdependent, notably when we deal with climate risks and resilience. So what we know is that we ought to confront the challenges of climate change. What we might know less is that a large part of positive climate impacts will come as co-benefits of actions which are driven by other priorities or events. And yet some of you in charge, for instance, of climate plans in public bodies will know that available climate information is not systematically integrated in decisions taken by other departments. One example, when a hurricane devastated some of the Antilles, emergency reconstruction work was mostly done according to current norms that were in turn based on resistance to past storms. While the new housing was meant to last several decades, specifications simply failed to factor in the forecast increase in intensity and frequency of extreme events. So just imagine how it is in other sectors and places that have not yet experienced major climate disasters. Of course, things are improving. There are now more regulations that force and also support actions, more consistency thanks to green taxonomies, wider dissemination of basic climate literacy. But however, this leads me to two comments. So the first comment is that even if you are working yourself on climate-related issues, it is not so easy to know what climate services to procure because the needs are more and more diverse, because many of those needs are hard to define and express, because other units in your organization will not discuss their needs with you if they are not clear themselves that those needs have a climate-related component. Because between you, well, let's say how you perceive your needs and how suppliers present their climate services, several layers of translation can be required. And simply because the offer is growing fast, but the demand is spiraling, and you, as a procurer, sometimes just don't know where to start. So you can't afford, for instance, to look for, and let alone purchase, the perfect solution for every particular need. Then the second comment, which is kind of related, is that as an individual procurer or public body, you may struggle to bring the market closer to your needs, even if you know what your needs are. The needs are spiraling, but not always in a structured way that would bring clarity and direction to the supply side. And remember, many suppliers are SMEs trying to decipher and navigate a fast evolving, but still emerging and immature climate services market. So on the first comment, well, you need to move from a case-by-case, one need, one solution approach to an integrated org-level procurement strategy that will connect the range of needs for climate services across your organization. And if you're a climate person or a senior leader in your region or your city, you will need to involve many more units than the usual suspects, and you may need methodological and practical help to do so. On the second comment, climate adaptation in particular can be very specific, place-specific, as you know, but many of your climate challenges will be at least partly shared by other countries, regions, or cities across Europe, and not always the first ones you would think of. So how about working with your counterparts, sharing some of those challenges to identify more precisely those common issues that are hard to address in isolation, but that could be clustered and described across several regions, and then use innovative procurement such as pre-commercial procurement to have a dialogue with the climate services market at a scale that becomes workable for suppliers. So one last thing before I pass the torch back to my colleague Stefka. Let me share a few elements of EU context, which will probably trigger some deep change in how the demand for climate services is structured and expressed, and that will certainly impact procurers and providers of such services. The European Commission, as you may know, has set up 5 missions to pool the necessary resources to support its priorities, including the European Green Deal. And here I have highlighted the adaptation mission and the cities mission. The logic in both cases is that to achieve net zero carbon neutrality or resilience to climate change across the whole continent by 2050, first movers must be identified and supported to aim for 2030 targets. 2030 is tomorrow, right? So even if your own region or city has later targets, they may learn from the experience of such first movers and transpose approaches and solutions to their own specific local contexts. And when the cities mission convenes discussions in the member states, some of the most advanced cities in terms of climate action, where they're asking, but are you serious? Net zero by 2030 seems impossible, even if we tripled what we are currently doing. And the answer was in simplified terms, well, precisely, this cannot be about multiplying what you are already doing the way you are doing it. It shall entail breaking organizational silos, designing integrated climate city contracts, and then reprojecting those roadmaps into the units within public administrations, across stakeholders and sectors more broadly. So we as the IT Climate Kick are leading 2 backbone projects that support the cities and adaptation missions. There's one called Net Zero Cities and another Pathways to Resilience. Both will work with a range of cities and regions on their specific decarbonation or resilience trajectories through adequately combining a number of levers that include, of course, technology, but also governance, regulation, economic models, indicators, behavioral change, climate justice, and so on. So you can easily imagine that climate services and climate information will have a crucial role to play at each stage of this iterative journey. So the next slide describes in an oversimplified manner, certainly, this radical shift where system thinking moves us from an incremental approach to a transformational one, which is applied here to the case of climate services. So in the currently dominant incremental approach, a tool purchase model is a norm. Specific services and incremental improvements are involved in fragmented interventions within organizational silos, often focused on single levers. And what you want to do is to move to a procurement model where a portfolio of connecting innovative solutions is designed and implemented with a wide appreciation and interplay of the change levers. So of course, when you will zoom in again into very specific needs, each city, region, organization shall still look for sharp solutions that respond to specific needs. But the core message here is that to be able to boost the use and the effectiveness of climate services, we must widen the circle of engaged teams and organizations. And we must also largely shift from this point solution logic to an integrated systemic approach. And the speed and the scale at which climate action is going to unfold at municipal, regional, but obviously also national levels and above demands that public authorities determine which systems they want to transform as a priority, using what combinations of levers, intervention points, transversal sets of metrics and indicators, etc. And this then has to be supported by climate services, but within a coordinated procurement strategy for such services at whole organizational level, rather than the addition of fragmented needs that do not allow public authorities to take full advantage of the procurement. So then I will pass back the floor to Stefka and start to dig a little bit into those taxonomies I hinted at.
Thank you very much. So yes, the questions that were used mostly to provoke then to answer my intervention is what are the main types of climate services? You heard our best attempt to attempt all the climate services, which is also the best attempt of the European roadmap of climate services. I'm recalling this definition and what Tantam said earlier about the connection between climate services and taxonomies to maybe for the sake of this discussion agree to not disagree on the definition of climate services, and to understand that sometimes it is easier if we look at some examples, in this case taxonomies of climate services, to see what climate services are, and then we would get at the end of my intervention as to why is it important to know what climate services are. So we have been looking as part of Protect. We have been looking at the different taxonomies that define climate services, and are trying to put them in, let's say, different boxes. We have looked into the climate taxonomy from Marco. It's a project you heard about a bit earlier. It's a project whose main goal was creating a taxonomy of climate services. We have been looking at the NACE taxonomy supported by Eurostat, used since the 70s and updated since, which reflects the full spectrum of economic activities within Europe. And you have also been looking, for instance, at the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. And the other two icons you see on the screens, EUMAX and Climate Europe's were European projects. Climate Europe or European projects that were not specifically looking at taxonomies, but if you're interested in looking further, which is what we did, they provide very useful insights into what one should be including in a climate services taxonomy, and what is maybe more important, what shouldn't be included there. So this is what we did. This is what we tried to do in Protect. However, as you heard, it's we are looking at climate services, but we are looking for climate services in only 5 domains, and we talk about specifically climate services that use or could use Earth observation. So the taxonomies that we had here were a little bit too generic for our purposes. So we looked a little bit deeper, and this is just to guide you through the idea that sometimes there are 6 taxonomies, but you really need to get deeper, because what is understood by climate services can be can be found in taxonomies that per se are not climate services taxonomies. For instance, we found our luck with the ERSC taxonomy of your services, and if I may call it this way, the taxonomy used by the USPA market report of 2022 about Earth observation. As this was the very specific realm of services we were looking into protect, and when we were looking at broader taxonomies, it was very difficult to match them against what we had in mind. So I mentioned already a couple of times the protect taxonomy, which we did mapping again our 5 domains against the different taxonomies. We mostly built on the USPA market taxonomies, but what you can see here are the first line shows you the 5 protect domains, and then you can see different subdomains that we have explored under each, and each of them represents then a category of climate services. So if we zoom in a little bit more, you can see, for instance, for the context of sustainable urban communities, these are the subdomains that we have in the left column, and in the right are the taxonomy of climate needs. And I understand that this may look very, very granular, and sometimes the divisions can seem arbitrary, and of course sometimes they are. But sometimes the things that can seem very, very similar to the other should be divided. And if we take, for example, from the category of climate services, we can maybe take the example of cultural heritage monitoring. I would just take a second to tell you why it is important that instances that seem very niche indeed have their own niche in taxonomies. It is because if you're looking at maybe it's easier if I go back to the previous slide. If you're looking at the other categories of climate services, cultural heritage monitoring maybe doesn't sound like monitoring different than monitoring by the other buildings, but what we have to keep in mind is that this is not any other building. It cannot be restored the same ways that we can restore residential buildings due to the norms in different countries, for instance, that the users are not the same, meaning that the agency that would be looking, or the private persons that would be looking at restoring private building, normally there are longer and lengthier procedures for restoring historical buildings, and it's also, of course, much more complicated, as there are many norms that tell us how things should be restored, and there are fewer risks that should be taken. So this is an example of why climate services go beyond the climate data. If you look at the category of climate services, a lot of the data that is taken there is the same, also because this is taxonomy built on Earth observation, so it's data provided partly from Earth observation, but then it's the idea that taxonomies nowadays go beyond data and they go towards services. And also, what is interesting, another trend we have noticed, is that taxonomies are also shifting from public offer to public demand. And if you look at this column, then many of the methodology we have looked at, especially the recent ones, they are structured from the point of view of the demand, so that it's supposed to help stimulate demand and help the users understand what is their specific niche. So some conclusions as to why I bothered you with this very lengthy Zoom, since we need to know about climate services. Probably you need to know about climate services as a public procurer, or as someone working on climate services. It helps to have a broad overview because it helps you know what the structure of the market is. It also helps you to know what is currently not on the market. In both cases, it could help you if you're looking to making a pre-commercial procurement, or if you're looking into integrating overall innovation procurement into the satisfaction of your climate needs. But the most important thing is that it helps you formulate your climate demand, and it helps you to see if the services you are currently using correspond to your needs. This is very briefly on my side. I would pass the floor to my colleague Iona Simone Rosca from Aerospace Valley, who would tell you more in detail what are climate services, how is Earth observation used in climate services, and how this refers to the 5 domains that we would have in Protect. Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stefka. So welcome everyone from my side as well. And today I will be presenting you what Earth observation is and the link between Earth observation and the climate services. So if you can move to the next slide, thank you. According to the European Space Agency, Earth observation is defined as a process of acquiring observations of the Earth's surface and atmosphere via sensors mounted on satellites, aircraft, drones, or at the surface, resulting in data in the form of digital imagery. And as you might know, in the last couple of decades, Earth observation has been an essential tool for monitoring the planet, the environment, also the human activities on the planet, and the impacts that are being that are a consequence out of it. The vast amount of the data collected through Earth observation is processed and converted into actionable information for the end users across several industries. And the two main important supporting technologies enabling this intermediate step of processing Earth observation data are artificial intelligence and also cloud computing. As you might know, the cloud computing has been evolved quite a lot in the last years, and it has been able to enable the efficient storage and processing of digital data, thereby facilitating the conversion of EO data into useful analytics. At the same time, artificial intelligence, which is the field of computer science dealing with making intelligent computer programs, has allowed the huge amount of data collected from satellites on a daily basis to be combined effectively, allowing the users to derive the needed insights. So basically, these two types of technologies together have enabled the rapid growth of the EO market, leading to development of several applications of Earth observation. Can you move to the second slide, please? Thank you so much. One of the biggest programs in the world is Copernicus program, which is managed by the European Commission, and it has the objective to monitor and forecast the state of the environment on land, sea, and the atmosphere in order to support the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, the efficient management of emergency situations, and the improvement of the security of every citizen. In frame of this program, there are being used Copernicus Sentinel satellites, and the data is collected and after that is being integrated with non-satellite sources to provide reliable and up-to-date information in about 6 different thematics areas, like land, marine, atmosphere, climate change, emergency management, and security. Data from the Copernicus program has applications for both public and private sectors across different market segments. And can we go to the next slide, please? Stefka, Tamtam? Oh, thank you so much. And now I guess you are wondering, what is the role of Earth observation in climate services? Well, as you might know, we are facing like a climate crisis, which is ongoing. And while this is evolving with the ongoing global warming, governments and businesses around the world are focusing on climate adaptation and also climate mitigation initiatives. So, for example, the EO data is expected to play a crucial role in the development of climate services, both focusing on adaptation and mitigation. The satellites, which have been monitoring the Earth continuously and helping our understanding of climate change, provide vital information regarding the state and evolution of the environment, as well as regarding the human activities on the planet. As a result, climate services applicable to several industries are expected to integrate Earth observation data into their products in order to take into account the environmental factors and changes over the time. Several emerging climate services have already started to integrate EO data into their development. For example, from providing extreme weather alerts for better disaster preparedness to both governments and businesses, to delivering crop-level insights to farmers, enabling water savings and improving overall yields. There are a number of climate services currently available in the market across a number of industries. Next slide, please. So, how can climate services apply to the 5 application domains? Next, please. As you might know, in Protect, as Stefka already mentioned, we have 5 application domains. And these are marine and coastal environments, energy and utilities, sustainable urban communities, agriculture, forestry, and other land use, and civil security and protection. And now we're going to deep dive into each of them a little bit. Next, please. Thank you. The definition of marine and coastal environment is that it is an aquatic environments with high level of dissolved salt. At the same time, includes open ocean. I'm sorry, can you? Okay. Open ocean, the deep sea ocean, and coastal marine ecosystem. As you might know, I hope, the climate services rely on Earth observation data for precise nowcasting and also forecasting, informing ocean weather algorithms, and also monitoring parameters influencing water. We have here examples of usage now, together with some challenges that that there might occur nowadays, like sedimentation, for example, like the volcano ash can be a sedimentation problem. At the same time, flooding and sea level rise, and also climate change impact on natural coastal processes and ecosystems. And at the same time, there are several satellite solutions, and a generic ones could be time series data for water constituents and other parameters, continuous monitoring, and contribution to models for ocean surface. Next, please. When it comes to the energy and utilities sector, this includes all activities related to water supply, sewage services, electricity dams, and natural gas. And the climate services rely on EO data for forecasting and also nowcasting, as previously, planning and optimization of renewable energy, offshore and onshore and offshore wind, solar, tidal, and wave, and monitoring of strategic for the utility sector infrastructure like dams or pipelines. And if we go to the next slide, we will have as well challenges and satellite solutions, and this has been categorized in 3 different categories, which are related with the solar power, which a challenge for this could be related with the because it's a weather-dependent energy. It is also difficult to determine the energy level productions. But as a satellite solution can be the site assessment, the solar forecasting, and also solar yield monitoring for grid optimization. When it comes to energy corridors, challenges that we are facing can be leakages, complex energy grid, conservative regulators, and as a solution can be reliable, safe, and sustainable monitoring of the service, and also frequent detection of activities in energy corridors. And when we are talking about large-scale water services, challenges that we are facing can be seasonal forecasting or lack of information for different variables like the snow information or soil moisture. And as a solution, we can have reliable service line for water industry, hydrological model evaluation, and even historical data availability for water quality and quantity. If we go to the next slide, please, we can talk about the sustainable urban communities, which can be green and sustainable urban, which can operate their human, natural, and financial capital with the goal to meet current and future needs in a sustainable manner while prioritizing a long-term perspective. When it comes to the climate services, they are relying on EU data for assessing and forecasting the air quality and pollen concentration in assisting urban planning and operations, like monitoring and preventing heat islands, building greener cities, and optimizing green cities, in particular when these are implementing elements of a smart Internet of Things infrastructure. If we go to the next slide now, we will see challenges in three different aspects. First, they are being related with urban vegetation, such as urbanization, or as I previously mentioned before, heat island effect. But a solution through by using satellites can be high-resolution vegetation data, measure carbon storage capacity, or local climate zones mapping. When it comes to the air quality, we know we are all facing this problem nowadays. It can affect human health and also can cause damages to the climate or to the materials. But as a solution can be the mapping of the air quality, also like in cities or in bigger areas, and also adapting the city's policies and reducing the exposure to pollution. When it comes to smart infrastructure, challenges that can occur can be the urban planning or 3D motion monitoring of buildings, landslides, pipelines, and other like this. And when it comes to solutions, we can have analyzing rooftops and calculating the potential for solar power, and also thermal imaging to identify heat losses and assess electrical consumption. And if we're talking about the last application domain, or the pre-last application domain, is agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. And here we can talk about crops, forests, also animal or microorganisms, because in Protect's case, this application domain also includes the bioeconomy. And when it comes to the use of Earth observation in climate services, the climate services can contribute to a more optimized and sustainable exploitation of the land based on precision. And I'm sorry, what's going on? Thank you. On precision agriculture, natural resources management. And as well, we can also have examples as providing forecasting and alerts on extreme weather events that could affect the crop yields, and it can reduce also the quantities of food. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We have two different sectors. Here we have the forest monitoring, which can face challenges such as illegal clear cuts, or regulation demand new tools, or outbreaks, or as we all know, last summer happened like the forest fires everywhere. And at the same time, as a solution could be a regular tracking and detection of changes, and also digital service to automatically monitor the state of a forest inventory. And when we're talking about early detection of plant stress, challenges that are being faced nowadays can be threat to human health and food security, climate change effects such as droughts or floods, and spread of plant pests through globalization and trade. And the solution could be identify and map the plants and the trees. It can be also like regular monitoring of large areas, and also like detection of stress in plants before they are visible in the naked eyes. Next slide, please. And the last application domain that we are talking about is civil security and protection, which includes the policies, the bodies, and the mechanisms that a country or region has in place to protect it against new and urgent threats to the security of people and or the functioning of critical infrastructures. If we want to talk about climate services that are using Earth observation, this can feed into systems monitoring extreme events and sending automated events to civil authorities and or the population. And as we can see in the next slide, challenges that we are facing nowadays can be related with migration, with preparedness for extreme events, can be also like search and rescue, and also related to infrastructure planning, and solutions that could be provided through by using satellites or like Earth observation can be forecasting, can be like preparedness or rapid mapping, and also monitoring and forecasting of the climate impact that migration can have or the climate drivers for migration. And this being said, this is the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
I
Joanna.
see there's a question from Ana Lucia, yes.
Yes, Ana Lucia.
Thank you, Joanna. It was not a question, it was just, I wanted to react, to congratulate all of you for the presentation.
Ah, thank you. And I think that now I will give the floor to Stefka to have the Q&A session.
First of all, I don't see any. Oh, thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the chat. So if you're feeling shy today, please don't. Please stop doing that and let us know if there are any concerns that you think that we may address.
General, there is an old trick that works, which is if you say, if you don't ask us questions, we will ask you questions, and that sometimes is stimulating. But we might do that anyway. I mean, no, I think the point is really to address any questions you have and help you for the sequel of the process. So one of the things I might say to fill the gap while you're formulating your questions. The idea with those webinars, I think it's partly to help you, I mean, individually that attend the webinars, and for that, your questions, what doesn't seem clear or things that were already, obvious to you, that's very good feedback for us because it helps us, just support you better. But the other thing, which is just as important, and all of us, I think, hinted at that, is that it's very important to engage people who would normally not come to a webinar like that or just not come to the climate services topic. And for that, the materials that we're sharing in webinars or in other modes needs to be also useful for you to engage, colleagues, other stakeholders, other teams that you think should be engaged in there.
And if I may add something,
sure.
Tam, just so you know, in case that you have if you are having questions outside of the webinar afterwards, or like while we are sharing with you the awareness materials and everything like that, don't hesitate to ask us. We will be always here to help you out and to clarify the things for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe if I may, because I would be curious actually and ask a question to people attending this session. So I know you come from very different backgrounds, so geographies, but also sectors, roles, and so on. But one of the questions we hold is, in fact, do you feel that do you know what climate services you have been using yourself? And two, do you know what climate services, if any, are used by other parts of your organization or the people you usually work with? And that question might sound stupid, but provide just a bit of background. We have done projects in the past. One of them was called Marco, and you saw the logo. And one of the things that really came through was that when you interviewed people that you knew were using climate services because they purchased them, very often they said, why are you talking to me? What do I have to do with climate information and climate services? So in a way, it doesn't matter, because if they use climate information, it doesn't matter that they call it climate services. But where it matters is that if they don't know that they're using this kind of information, then they won't disseminate the usefulness of such information for things that don't have climate written in big letters, you know, on their forehead. So, so I think that would be my question: if there is none other coming from you, and if you work in cities or in SMEs or in consultancies, I'd be very curious to know what is your experience with that. And do you feel that you're tapping the potential of climate services as it's available? If anybody wants to give it a try, it would be great.
We don't have any representatives of cities or regions today.
Well,
I'm not going to do name calling, but I saw some of you on the list. But it would be really very useful if you give us your impressions on what Tantam asked, and also to maybe share with your hands-on experience other than the rather theoretical framework that we have been presenting here.
And if you don't like my question, you can ask another one, of course. I don't know, what would one of the city or region representatives in the call want to share the so to share the experience. Also, I see a question from okay, I see that things are coming up in the chat. So there's one question from Roxanne, which is whether any of the participants in the session are part of the Net Zero Cities project. So yes, it might be. So that's a good question. I know that there are cities which are not part, which are represented today. They're not part of the Net Zero Cities project itself, but they are in national platforms that are very active on this space. So yeah, if anyone wants to take the floor on that. Also, I know that there are regions which are involved with the adaptation mission, for instance, and that signed the charter of the adaptation mission. Then there's a question from Sophie from Nice, which is when we can see a catalog of products available. So that would be a question for
I think
for
I can answer to that.
Yes,
for the moment, just so you know, we conducted a mapping of the Earth observation climate services on a European Union level, which has been finished actually on the 20th of March, so like a few days ago. And now we're in the analyzing phase in order to go through all of them to make sure that they are they're going to be suitable for the needs of the project, and they're going to meet the requirements for joining the community of Protect. And I think that in the upcoming month, for sure, it will be available, a catalog of the products on our community management platform.
Thank you, Jona. I see there's also a comment from Danielle, so saying that he represents Nigeria and that you used Copernicus Sentinel 5P data and NASA Giovanni services for research purposes only. And I would say it's also interesting for us to know, having had this research, research perspective on the data, whether you have an experience of being, approached by non-scientists, well, let's say non-researchers, public bodies, for instance, but also private organizations on, this translation gap I referred to. So the fact that that data are available, that they're getting more sophisticated, there are even many of them available for free, but you don't really know how to use them properly or which ones are fit for your purpose. And I guess also the kind of counterpart question for Sophie Morgenstern, for instance, but also others is if you at your level or other teams which are maybe on operations have access to a catalog of products, is it actually straightforward for them to identify which ones they want to prioritize and how they can make the best of them in terms of co-benefits and so on? So if you want to react on that now, we still have about 10 minutes, but otherwise that can be food for thought for the following sessions. I don't know, Danielle, would you like to say something about this? If you're still here.
Is that on this?
Yes, we can hear you a bit faintly, but we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I'm in meeting, sir. So come again with the question, please. I was quite engaged with some other activity.
Sorry, yes. So the question was because you mentioned that you used Copernicus Sentinel 5P data and NASA Giovanni services for research purposes only, and my question was whether you were approached by organizations beyond the research scientific community, for instance, public bodies, but also potentially private organizations that wanted to use more of, make more benefit, derive more benefit from those available data, but were just not able to do it by themselves.
Yes, I've as a researcher, I'm currently a researcher with university in southeastern Nigeria, that is Nnamdi Azikiwe University. So I've had interface with private and government organizations in Nigeria and internationally, most especially with the Ministry of Environment as regards weather services, which I've had to support them with my team, not myself only, in terms of giving them support on basic meteorological data and also using it to forecast how to be able to forestall the issue of flooding and other activities that are impacting Nigeria. And also the second one which I had was with a private organization where they use it for mapping farming communities using Sentinel-2 and 3 data for their agricultural purposes in northern Nigeria. So these are different scenarios where I have supported and I'm supporting with my team members. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think then a question for for you, but also for researchers is how you manage to see the ease or the difficulty of non-researchers to use the support that you're providing, and I know it's not easy to measure, but sometimes we see that it's easier than expected because the needs are very well formulated, but in other cases there is quite a bit of loss in translation. I think to Sophie's point, of course, well, that's a very broad question, so don't pretend to answer all of it, but maybe a few hints, and also Melissa or others, if you want to step in, please compliment. I guess there are several ways in which we can support. So yeah, indeed, there are the webinars which will be addressed at each domain, but even before that, I think it's two things. So one is whether what are the real difficulties that operational teams have in using services that they have already procured. So they may not identify them so well, but sometimes it's worth making it explicit, because it can be that the services don't match the needs, but it can also be that the way the services are presented do not put forward some functionalities that would speak to the needs. So sometimes the way the need is expressed is very important in the way they've been used. But then there is really this question, and that's more connected to the PCP dimension of Protect, which is that there are situations where it's a matter of just formulating the question clearly, and with some translation, you meet a segment of the market that addresses exactly this kind of needs. But in many cases, even if you know the solutions, you understand what they're doing, to know what combination would be most relevant for you, that's not easy for you as a demand owner, but it's not easy for the providers either, because in fact the providers, yes, they have some products on shelf, but in fact they have many more products which are in, as Melissa showed the other day, on TRL levels between 3 and 8, and in fact they can assume what the needs are going to be. But having this dialogue with the demand owners at an early stage allows them to cluster the modules and the elements in a way that speaks to the needs. And it sounds obvious to say it like that, but in fact, in some cases, it's pretty straightforward. In other cases, it really requires iterations with with several solution providers. One, to get a clearer view of what are your priority needs, but two, also to build the confidence that you're actually purchasing what would suit your needs best and not what the provider happens to be pushing in front of you. And I don't mean it in a bad way to providers. I mean, it's so yes, for instance, I'm, you know, on what you say, with the GIS geographic information systems, I don't know. You would know better. In fact, if you feel that they're very clear on their needs and what they need is very practical help to identify the right segment, then maybe it's a bit early. But if you feel that in fact it goes a bit beyond that, that they have you know, state-of-the-art geographic information systems, but they feel that they are not used the way they could by a number of units in across the municipality, for instance, then it might not be so early to come with those questions. So we can't promise that we're not necessarily matchmakers, you know, in the sense that he or she might not come out of the session having the miracle solution. But you can have let's say a more structured approach. I think something that sometimes is missing as well is that what I tried to describe, it's not so easy to go from each individual unit having a particular request to the city saying, well, in fact, what we want to do, we have a roadmap to, as I said, you know, climate neutrality by 2030 or 40. And we have some levers we know we can work on because we have the tools and we're used to using them. But are there other tools that could complement that would allow us to work on levers that we haven't activated? And those levers, as I said, are not necessarily technological, they're technical, but sometimes the climate services can help you have some visibility on what you could monitor, you know, or how you could combine them more easily, or how you could make them more accessible to units that don't use those data so far. And I guess that part is not just a GIS problem. It's something that is really at the level of the city governance, and of where you see there is room to involve more teams. So on that, I know it's a bit of an abstract answer I'm making, but on that, it's really something that we can act on much more easily if you come, you know, to us potentially with colleagues, and we try to sort out what is a space where we can work. It's a longer answer than I wanted, but I hope it's making sense. Are there any other questions or comments?
Maybe I will take advantage of the silence and thank you everyone for being here. Yes, Tantam, I would let you do that.
Yes.
So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It means a lot to us. And a kind reminder that on the 4th and 5th of April, we have 2 more webinars, respectively, on pre-commercial procurement and then climate services, where we will discuss more in detail how to match needs to solutions. So I posted the chat earlier. It's probably the same link that you used to register. Thank you already. And if I may say that on a Thursday, have a lovely weekend ahead. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.